So we read this book, right, or part of this book, Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger, and it's really not meant to be like a social critique or anything like that. It's really just about Holden Caulfield's experience, and J.D. Salinger kind of talks about how that experience came out of his own. It resonated with him. That's the character came out of his own experience, right? And at the time, it was very shocking because, especially because in the later chapters, there's an attempted encounter with a prostitute, but also just the kind of general irreverence that Holden Caulfield exhibits throughout just his language and his activities throughout the book, right? And it was kind of like this: you're having a fancy dinner party, and you've invited the jazz piano player, and you paid a lot of money, and like all your business contacts are there, and everything's going great, and everybody's having interesting conversation, and there's great champagne, and it's a lot of fun. Is it fun? But then your like uncle is in the second bedroom, and he's been on a drinking binge, and he stumbles out into the middle of the room, and he's hungover, and he passes out in front of everybody. And it's like, look, things are not as perfect as they appear, right? And that's kind of, I think, a little bit what Holden Caulfield is doing here when the book debuts in 1950. Things are not as perfect as they appear, and I think that Holden Caulfield. A lot of people like to hate the book because they don't like Holden Caulfield, right? And there's plenty to criticize about Holden Caulfield. He's kind of self-centered and immature and poor kid, like whatever. And also, I think part of the thing to remember is, right, he's sort of been neglected by the parents. They provided for him financially and materially, but they haven't really been around, and they've been sort of like passing him off in between these fancy boarding schools, so they don't really have to deal with him and engage with him and have an authentic relationship with him. And so he's kind of stuck in these fancy boarding schools, and he's not really good at playing the game, right? He's not really good at doing the things he needs to do to get ahead. He's really more interested in trying to seek out more genuine friendships, right? And connect with people in a more authentic way. That seems to be kind of his goal throughout a lot of the parts of the novel. Now, but I think a more important question of whether we like Holden Caulfield is, can we trust him? Are his perceptions trustworthy, right? Well, he is descending into a nervous breakdown, so no, not entirely. And there are times in the novel, especially later on, when his perceptions are kind of going off haywire, right? And he's just so consumed by anxiety, right? But a lot of that is because he is a very sensitive person, and because he's a sensitive person, then he also is a keen observer of human nature, right? And I think he does kind of alert us to certain ways in which it's very easy to fall into, patterns of being self-centered, right? And a lot of the people that he describes as phony, we could really just kind of say, well, they're really just self-centered, or they're using relationships as a means to an end, right? So, for instance, there's the former headmaster he describes at one of his old schools who would only, shake hands with the parents who looked like they had it all together. And then the parents who looked like they were losers, he would ignore, right? So in other words, he would be kind, but only as a means to an end. He would connect with people only as a means to an end, and he would judge only based on appearances. And that's the kind of thing that Holden Caulfield really cannot stand. And he's very sensitive to knowing when someone is not taking him seriously, when someone is not treating him with respect. But he also seems pretty tuned in to when someone is treating another person without respect and without dignity, right? So Holden Caulfield is really kind of, in some ways, he is a good judge of character, right? He doesn't always get it right. He kind of misjudges the situation a lot of times. Sometimes he doesn't give people a lot of benefit of the doubt sometimes, right? But there are ways in which, he is noticing things about people that maybe only an outsider could notice. Someone who wasn't like fully engaged in playing the game well, right, might not catch on to all these little subtleties that Holden Caulfield is catching on to, right? So I think kind of the central question that he's posing to us is, how can we make sure that we're not judging by appearances, right? How can we not become too consumed with reputation? And how do we make sure, right, that we're not assuming that since we do have maybe a good reputation, or we are playing the game well, and we're doing everything we're supposed to do, right, quote unquote, even if we're doing all those things, we can still be hurting people, right? We can still be having a negative impact. Okay, and I think so. Holden Caulfield's kind of trying to, I mean, he's challenging us to maybe a little bit a deeper level of self-reflection, maybe potentially, right? And I think that has relevance for us. First of all, it has relevance in any society, but especially one that has a lot of affluence and that has social mobility. Because if we have the potential of moving up and improving our lot, yet not that we shouldn't seek to do that, but just that reputation becomes very important in that context, and appearances become very important in that context. Okay, so then it becomes ever more important for us to kind of be wary about that, and not to allow the pursuit of, material success or the appearance of having it put together direct our lives, but rather we're really seeking the good for other people. That we're making that the object. We're seeking the good for ourselves and for other people, not just the good in kind of a spiritual sense and a broader sense. Now, Salinger, none of that comes from Salinger, right? Like, it's from a totally like secular perspective, and it like ends in nihilism, right? Because like Holden Caulfield just falls into nervous breakdown and then gets sent off to this asylum. Ends in nihilism. Not a good ending for Holden Caulfield, right? But it does kind of show like what the ways in which an affluent society or an affluent family even can fail the children, can leave them alienated and isolated. And so like and the things that it offers to them to try to substitute for genuine connectivity within the family or within the society, material wealth, through kind of playing this game well and conforming and fitting in. These things don't work. They're not fulfilling. They're not meaningful, right? And in fact, they can just increase the sense of isolation and alienation a person feels. Okay, and so yeah, I mean, I think that those are all things that are relevant in the post-war world, particularly, and also continue to be relevant to us today. But keep in mind, right? Like, it's not a book that is a great piece of literature in the sense that it gives us like a solution. It doesn't present us with like a full-blown complex worldview, right? Because it ends in nihilism, right? But it is kind of helpful in terms of diagnosing some of the problems that people face in an affluent society, and some of the patterns of behavior that we need to, pay attention to, that can impact the experience of Holden Caulfield, that can impact our own experience or the experience of those around us. Because look, our own society is not that different from 1950s America, right? It's still a very affluent society, right? All right.